Hello, lovely podcast people. Sorry for the slight delay between episodes. Those of you who are followers on Instagram, I had some fairly major back issues. I was in hospital and anyway, so I'm very sorry. I was getting back on a flow, but here I am back to talk about sleep. And depending on what I call this episode, I'll probably go for something a bit clickbait because, the importance of sleep. No one cares. And my job is to make nutrition sexy, nutrition and physiology and whatever. And I think the take I'm going to give you on this is probably a little bit different from the industry, cumulative average. And I guess my initial interest in sleep comes from the fact that I don't sleep a lot. And it's not something that I necessarily try and do. It's possibly genetic. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm someone where people say things about sleep and it doesn't seem to hold true for me. Even just something as simple as, people tend, function best on 7 to 9 hours and just what the average is, and say, last night went to bed sometime after 4 and woke up feeling refreshed and ready to go just before 9. So I'm going to be talking a lot about the number of hours slept in the research. And I think it's something that really isn't reported well in the fitness industry with nutritionists and personal trainers and doctors and anyone talking about health. And I think when things aren't done clearly, it does two things. One, it disempowers the layperson, a little bit like when people talk about genetics and the tendency to gain fat, for instance. It can be disempowering if you think that, well, what's the point? And then secondly, it also doesn't help practitioners if you are dealing with a client and you are dealing with like broad brushstroke things like when you don't get enough sleep, happens. And really, when we look at the actual hours that are being researched, we see different things. And so I'm just interested in it because, people are like, oh, you need this much sleep. And I'm notorious for, a few events. I'll not sleep through the night, which, by the way, I'm not trying to get anyone to sleep less. My goal with this podcast is to balance the discussion as usual and to inform and to do that, to stop the disempowerment that maybe some people feel. Particularly, I was kind of thinking about this, and the two main groups I think that really, really, really need to consider this, or maybe three, but the two main: one, breastfeeding mothers; two, shift workers; three, just an extreme spectrum of individuals who just work insanely hard. And I remember one of my kind of end of career clients, very high powered businessman, essentially said to me, look, my goal is to be sleeping less than 4 hours a night, but pure, super functional. And his health was in the gutter. He was like, I want to be this optimal performance functioning human so I can sleep less than 4 hours a night, and he was even looking at people around him. And one thing, I suppose, if you've ever seen the film Limitless, are you aware of that film? And it's kind of based on drugs that are pharmaceutical drugs that are available out there that essentially allow you to stay awake and be more productive potentially over long periods of time. And I was actually, in more recent years, became aware of certain peers of mine, business people, etc., who are using these drugs to help them work more, basically get ahead of the competition, I guess is the word. And I actually tried one of these tablets once, and I about died. And I'm bigger, heavier than the individual who gave it to me. And so, and it was like a moderate dose. I might have even only taken half a tablet. I don't know. Anyway, it was at a time where I was really, really, really pushing the boat out, burning the candle at both ends. Like, even for me, there's been times when I've done 16 hours sleep in a week. I think the most crazy one I did was like 11 hours in 5 days. And then I was presenting for 2 days. Can't really remember. Anyway, there's been times in the last few years where I love working, I get hyped up by it, but I have tight deadlines, I work well under pressure. And the problem is I also get a little bit arrogant with it. Or not arrogant, but complacent, sorry, is the right word. As in, I'll be like, well, I've got 48 hours left to do this piece of work. It's only 10 hours. And instead of doing that thing, what's the law? Parkinson's law. The law that for any given job, it will take, if you designate an amount of time, the job will take that amount of time. It's so true. And so, unfortunately, when you can do that, I end up doing just that, of just leaving it to the last minute and doing it in the... Anyway, so I'll just talk a bit about the research. The research has been done, and there is probably... there's lots of different genes involved in sleep, but there's probably some sort of mutations, and they've kind of done the deletion gene mutation animal research and made whatever certain species removed this gene from them, and they've slept significantly less and required significantly less sleep, and they sleep less amount of time, but the REM sleep doesn't seem to go down much. I've got all of these theories, like I think I sleep short but well. Arnold Schwarzenegger famously said something like, I was going to do his accent then. Can I do it? Get to the chopper. He says something like, you are sleeping 8 hours a night, and I suggest you sleep faster, or something like that. He's talking about getting ahead in life and working hard. And I think I sleep fast. So, I get my 8 hours in 5 hours, or just under 5 hours. Sometimes, I don't try, and often I'll do big sleeps and this, that, and the other. Anyway, it's not about me, about the research. So, but this is what led me to questioning it. And I just think the powers of not sleeping quite enough are overplayed. And I hear people, and even I'll say this, practitioners hammering home sleep so much with their clients and just going, you need to sleep more, you need to get your 8 hours. If you don't get your 8 hours, and you know what, that's probably what I'll call this podcast, is a lack of sleep does not halt fat loss, because that's how it's sold. And even people going, if you don't get enough sleep, if you only, if you miss an hour or 2 or 3 of sleep, your appetite's going to go through the roof. Look at this study. This meta-analysis study, it showed that ghrelin was increased, whatever. And I'll as usual, the show notes, I'll post lots of these studies that people quote, and you can see that more often than not, they're talking about one of two things. One, complete sleep deprivation, where you're not allowed to sleep for an entire night. And yes, we see some hormonal changes. So leptin might go down. And when leptin goes down, appetite tends to increase. Perceived ratings of hunger increase. Not talking about hormones, but again, just, on face value. Ghrelin goes up. One of our gut appetite hormones goes up. But who realistically is just not sleeping an entire night at all, ever? Like, it's quite a strange one-off scenario. And if it happens, it's probably for a reason. Like you have to take your partner to A&E or something like that. I'll tell you what, though, how good is gas and air? Just on that. Anyway. Taking me back to my trip there recently. So we've got this scenario of people overstating the research. The other thing that the research looks at regularly, most cited, is basically half sleep, which is kind of, they say, 4 or less hours. There is some newer research which I'll talk about, but most of the research that is quoted is 4 hours or less sleep, or no sleep at all. So when we've got clients, and again, please don't be a Karen, or don't be someone with a chip on your shoulder, or don't be the typical human who is incapable of having an open mind and hearing things that are not said. I am not encouraging anyone to sleep less. I'm also going to stay, mostly in my lane. Although I feel like someone like me, I'm allowed to go outside of my lane, because I will literally just quote. I am just disseminating the body of literature. And I sort of maintain within a scope of practice that I at least understand how to disseminate that information. Unlike certain people, Mark Hyman, lots of people, not Mark Hyman, sorry, Mark Huberman. Is that his name? Mark Huberman. Everyone knows Huberman by his Huberman podcast. I keep being told and hearing from people I trust that he's a good guy. And if this gets sent to him or whatever, it's this, I don't get him, because he's going outside of his scope of practice, and he's really, really wrong when he does. And so I just can't quite understand, because people I trust are sort of saying he's a good guy. He wants people to get the truth. And he's not out there like hurting. He's not like a Mark Hyman, who's just a complete and utter charlatan, or Tim Spector, who's just getting worse and worse and worse, becoming a complete sellout. I'm going to do some specific podcasts on that, because I feel like people need to realize that, because I did that reel that got, a few 100,000 views pretty fast, and people got real mad. But he's a sellout. He's saying stuff that no other scientist in his area says, but he's like, oh, he's a top rated 100 scientist. I don't care. He's human, and he has got massive conflicts of interest, and he's saying stuff that all the other scientists say are not correct. Like scientists at his level. So me coming out and going, yeah, he's a BSer. He's completely overstating stuff. He's completely wrong. Him going, what was the thing that really triggered people? Something about calorie counting is utter nonsense. A statement like that, no one credible makes those statements. You can go, calorie counting is imperfect. Absolutely. Not everyone needs to calorie count. Absolutely. These are things I've said. You can lose fat without calorie counting. Absolutely. Calorie counting is not inert. It can cause harm. Absolutely. But it's utter nonsense. Like, what a clown. Anyway, let me not get too much off topic. So in fact, I just written down a couple of things. I just said I'll talk about genetics, appetite, talking about, an increase in calories people might consume if they do lack sleep, metabolic rate, some stuff, myths on that, increased muscle loss, decreased fat loss. Those are just the titles that I just want to talk about for you. So, and like I said, this is really just to help those who are the layperson who's disempowered, and then practitioners who want more information. I'll give you loads and loads of studies on my website, martin-macdonald.com/EP, and whatever episode this is, maybe 102. Also, if you're on a watching platform, super duper, like quite an expensive camera now. This is my new setup. Let me know what you think. Maybe it's just pointless. Maybe all you can just see is my pause and whatever, but just, I don't know, if you think it's cool, let me know what the sound quality is from the last 2-3 episodes. This is should be the best. We've had a little play around, wanting to maximize your user experience, because I know people like my dulcet tones. I've been told a lot. It's a very nice compliment. I've enjoyed being told that. It was a unforeseen outcome, side effect of doing the podcast. Never thought I had a particularly nice voice. Still don't, but I'm just glad you guys enjoy my waves inside you. Your ears. So, yeah, the appetite is the first thing I just wanted to talk about. And so lots and lots of people talk about how bad it is. And I see this too much in practitioners, online coaches, whatever. If you sleep, it will stop your fat loss. It will halt your fat loss efforts. And it would be correct if they just said it might make your fat loss endeavors harder. One, I'd be more comfortable with that statement. But secondly, if they do post reference, and let's be honest, 99.9% of people on Instagram don't, the studies that they are talking about, or they've heard someone talk about, or they're referencing, are these complete sleep curtailment, no sleep at all, or just sleep deprivation to 4 hours or less. And their clients are reporting, I don't get 8 hours, I get 7 or 6 or 5. Who's regularly only getting 5 hours sleep? I know people, and some are kind of coping just all right, and some are not coping that great. And again, it's just treating the person in front of you, but also being realistic of I missed a couple of hours sleep, I only got 6 hours sleep, I feel okay. And it's just overstating stuff isn't necessary. Sleep's great. We should be trying to change our routine so that we get enough sleep for us and our situation. But at the same time, not thinking, because I've got this lifestyle where children and work and a relationship and whatever things people have in their life. And it's just don't even bother starting because you only get 6.5 hours sleep a night. No, you can make great progress on, I'm not going to talk much about it, but there are studies out there on a lack of sleep and, like significant, either complete, like I said, sleep curtailment. I'm jumping ahead a bit here, sorry. And strength recovery after like muscle damaging exercise, 24 hours of sleep, no sleep, versus the other group who did sleep at 24 hours. Have I restored my muscle strength back to the same level as someone who did sleep? And the research seems to be like, yeah, it hasn't really done too much. If you then go for like more high intensity interval training stuff like type training, or, and looking at more like peak power type stuff, again, it's highly likely not optimal. But it's not this just like fall off a cliff situation that people talk about. And again, it's complete sleep curtailment or even 4 hours sleep. If you're getting 6 hours, here's another thing that has prompted this podcast. And sorry, there's a teeny bit of passion in my voice, but I'm just one of those individuals that I guess is outside of the typical recommendations. And you might be someone who needs 9 hours sleep and you're here. Don't be that person again who's like, well, if when I talk about breakfast, you don't have to eat breakfast. Be like, well, if I don't have breakfast, I'd eat everything in the world. Cool, pal, go eat breakfast. I don't care. I didn't ask. What I'm saying is don't go around saying everyone should do X, Y, Z if the evidence isn't there. And in my situation, I'm like, I can't remember the sleep gene thing, but it might be like 0.1% or something of people with it. But that's not what I'm discussing. I'm discussing the body of literature done in the average type of person. And even in those individuals, when you go, right, we're going to have this group doing 9 hours sleep, this group doing 8 hours sleep, or a crossover study, 7 hours, 6 hours, 5 hours. The 6, 7, 8, and 9, there's just no differences. The studies just aren't finding any differences. Then you get to the 5-hour difference group. There is actually a study. I don't know it, but I will reference it obviously for you. I don't know the author off the top of my head. And they did what I've just described there. And literally it was like, I don't know, I do, I make notes, but I don't really use them when I'm doing the podcast usually. And anyway, oh yeah, there it is. Contu et al. It's a 2023 study actually. There you go. Anyway, oh yeah, I've actually copy and pasted a little quote from it because it was that interesting. Hunger, prospective hunger or desire to eat certain foods. There was no difference in hunger. I've copy and pasted at the wrong point. There's no difference between 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Desire to eat certain foods. However, post-hoc analysis indicated that participants in the 5-hour condition had an elevated desire to consume sweet foods and fruit on the final morning of the study. So I think that study was like 7 days in a lab being forced to only sleep 5 hours in a night and only on the last day on the final morning. So I'm just saying these things, as you can see, to put things a bit more in perspective than what I think is typically sold. Now, again, I'll just go back to my little headings. There are some newer studies which are very interesting where they have gone, let's be more realistic. Let's do a few hours off sleep. Now, it's still like a third of your normal sleep. So you're going from like 7 to under 5 hours sleep, for instance. And so if there is a time in your life where you're just like burning the candle at both ends and you're between 4 and 5 hours sleep and normally you get over 7, some of those things might happen. But again, hunger isn't across the board in the literature going through the roof. Appetite is not going through the roof. There are some studies, yes, where it's like appetite goes up. But there's other studies. So it's equivocal. And this is the point I'm trying to make. And again, it's significant sleep reduction. We're not just talking a couple of hours sleep missed here. We're almost always, literally always. I'm trying to think of a study where it's not. But all we're getting there is like, okay, I prefer sweet foods. I prefer, if you give me a fruit juice with one, or a sugar sweetened beverage, looking for good universal terms to use here. I prefer it to be sweeter. So your preference for sweet foods is going up. Like, that's not necessarily the end of the world. Like, sweetness isn't a negative thing, but if it does then lead to change in habits. But you need to remember, again, I'm going to talk about artificial sweeteners. I'm going to do a whole load on them because they're such a trigger subject that people need to be better informed on. And people are being super misled on, again, by people like Tim Spector. But just preferring sweet foods, like, cool, eat more fruit. Not an issue. As I said in that study, they actually did have an increased preference for fruit. Cool. Great, go ahead and eat some fruit. But if it's, if they're just going for a lot more hyperpalatable foods, a lot more energy dense foods, it's not just high sugar or sweetness foods, it's also just like high sugar, high fat, high calorie, low nutrient density. And if they're just really, really struggling with, quote unquote, a sweet tooth, then it's maybe not the best thing. But again, it's still a significant sleep reduction. So the whole appetite thing is not strong. Your actual appetite with a small sleep reduction is not strong. If you're going to half your sleep to 4 hours or less, it gets a lot stronger. It may be that your appetite just goes up a little bit, and the studies aren't really showing that. And I'm not saying to sleep less on purpose, but I am saying absolutely, without a doubt, if there are reasons outside of your control, you can still enter onto a journey of health, improvement, exercise, etc., without being too worried about it. I've actually just popped into my head, I don't know where I went with a tangent earlier, but one of the things that people say to me is, I would typically, it was a period in my life I was working very, very hard. My children were very, very young, and I would often be in the gym at, a wacky time, 10 p.m., 11 p.m., 12 a.m., 1 a.m., 2 a.m. And sometimes when people would start asking me these really ivory tower complex questions so in terms of doing that training, is there a specific reason you're doing it at that time? Or so do you think the impacts of negative impacts of sleep, where is this being offset? And I'm just like, put it this way. Don't go to the gym at all. Or go to, they're like, oh, with the 1 hour in bed, could that then actually be beneficial to you? I'm like, beneficial to what? Like, if I have a goal of exercise makes me feel good, or I'm trying to gain muscle or whatever, or get stronger, I've worked with elite athletes who are elite and parents, we're talking Commonwealth Games and parents and full-time jobs. And it's like, oh, should I lose an hour's sleep to get an hour of training in? Or shall I not do the training? And it's like, you don't do the training, you don't get any of the benefits. It's, and this is it just shows you another reason why people ask me that question. I'm like, look, I either don't do the training and I get nothing and I get 1 hour more sleep. If I'm like struggling with mental health, talking about the Huberman's situation of he should stick to the brain more and stop talking about nutrition because he just keeps getting it wrong. And I don't know if it's for financial gain or if he just is biased or what is going wrong with him, because he's seemingly intelligent and has such other good stuff he could talk about that would be helpful. But, if you're struggling with your mental health, sleep is, just a huge part of that sort of multi-component situation that you start looking at the sleep side. But if everything's all good, yeah, I want to train and I'll lose 1 hour sleep to do the training type scenario. So that just made me think of something. Yeah, there are some studies actually looking at muscle gain. I might, because I'm going to talk about muscle loss with lack of sleep, acute sleep deprivation. Reduces muscle protein synthesis. 1 night no sleep. Again, it's complete no sleep. And, actually, that's not the one I was thinking of. There are other studies that look at that, and then doing training attenuates that negative effect. So by doing the training, you reduce or stop the negative effect that sleep has had on it. Now, if you had the good sleep, that you didn't not sleep for an entire night, you'd probably be in a better place. But just doing the training puts you in a better place. Just training is so powerful, obviously, for things like muscle gain or performance gain or whatever strength. So where were we? Calories. Okay, so my next heading is calories. And you might think, oh, calories and appetite, same thing. No, not the same thing. if you sleep less, and this is one of those ones where it's when it's like, oh, when you know it's easy, isn't it? You sleep less. What are you doing in that time of sleeping? Let's say you're just watching TV. Let's say you're scrolling TikTok. This is something for me where if I'm just like in a really bad habit of something, or I've just messed about, like I say bad, like I'm replying and helping people for free in my DMs, but just like doing those things, but just should probably get off my phone. And I end up hungry. And I'm like, oh, I just really want to have a little bit of food before I go to sleep now. I've been up an extra 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever hours. And this is where I think people get confused. There's fairly consistent evidence that we can see that people who sleep less consume more calories. But then there's this whole argument. People go, oh, it affects your metabolic rate. I was really surprised when I saw some, quote unquote, evidence-based courses talking about this reduced metabolic rate with the lack of sleep, which might lead to weight gain. But it's just not the case. Like, if anything, people expend more energy when they sleep less. But it's just for a factor of you're not lying down and instead you're sitting or standing or moving. But more often than not, people aren't moving a great deal, but they are awake, and it's very, 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 very easy to consume a lot of calories above and beyond any small increase. So you might increase your energy expenditure by 10%, but you increase your, so you're at 110% of the energy expenditure would, but your energy intake is 130%. And that's a figure we see. And typically in these studies, again, when you go from 8 hours to 4 hours sleep, they'll keep you awake until 4 a.m. and let you sleep 4 till 8. And you basically consume 500 calories between 12 and 4 because they give you free access to food, and you're bored and you're in a lab and whatever. So again, your food environment will change that. What do you tend to reach for in those moments? If you're reaching for a protein shake, very different from reaching for whatever, biscuits. If you're reaching for, there's different ways of satisfying your appetite that maybe will have a very differential effect on this outcome anyway. So bear that in mind, which I have not made in any of my notes anywhere, that's just popped into my head, is there's a big difference often as well between someone who is managing their calories. We always have to have these discussions. And let me just make a quick note. My pen's not working. Non-tracking methods for fat loss. I've written NTMFL. Let's see if I can remember what that means. I've spoken too much and lost my train of thought. Yes. One thing that must be discussed here, and always needs to be discussed in everything, is someone who's calorie counting versus someone who's not. There is different advice we need to give these people. They're different situations. I'll just jump forward to this NTMFL, non-tracking methods for fat loss. One thing that we do discuss is there's a really interesting study that is that we actually teach inside, or I reference inside one of the Matt Nutrition Uni lectures, but it's essentially this sort of behavioral study around sleep and around calorie management. And essentially it was something like sleeping an extra 1 or 1.5 hours per day. And it sort of leads to a reduction in energy intake and so I think it was something like increased sleep from 7 hours to like 8 or 8.5, and leads to this significant reduction in energy intake over 24 hours. So it's like brilliant. And then that leads to a moderate weight loss. Someone's just in bed for that extra hour and a half where they might have a little snack. This is what we're seeing. So in terms of appetite, it's not changing all that much unless we have massive fluctuations in sleep. However, just your ability to consume calories. So if you're eating ad libitum, to pleasure, and again on a population level, that's why I'm totally happy with a global public health message of sleep, super important. Get your hours. But on an individual basis where people are more astute and paying attention to their own health and whatever, I don't like a lot of public health guidelines. They're very misguided and too specific, but given in a broad brushstroke way. You should base all of your diet on carbohydrates. You don't need to do that. No, you don't. your diet should be low fat. Like you've got these people who are like, again, Tim Spector, so unbelievably anti-low fat because he's a quack. He's someone who's gone from a very specific area and then tried to just think he understands everything about nutrition because it must be simple. But he's like, I will say this, sort of in his defense, he's like me when I was 21, but the problem is he's this top-rated scientist and he should not be that. Like when, he's like a newly qualified PT who's just learned about nutrition. Oh, not everyone needs to eat low fat. The government's, to get people, whatever. It's just these, like me, you can probably still find articles on the internet where I've gone, you need to manage your insulin for fat loss. But I was brand new to the game. 20 years ago, like, you can't be his age and qualifications and experience and whatever and be saying such dumb. You can't be on TV saying that stuff. So when we talk about non-tracking methods, sleep can be helpful from simply a behavioral perspective. When we talk about behavior change within MNU, the behavior change module, we talk about even just all through the fat loss lectures as well, these like non-tracking methods. Sleep can be something we can have a discussion about. But again, it's just being evidence-based in what we're talking about, not going, you will eat 500 extra calories if you miss a couple of hours sleep. It's not the case. But if someone's awake for 4 extra hours and they have certain habits or certain foods in the house and, restraint is an issue or whatever, there you go. Cool. So that was the longer than probably needed to be discussion around appetite versus calories. Metabolic rate, I mentioned that about people saying it goes down, which it definitely doesn't. And then finally, here's, I guess, the stuff where I'm like, sleep is important. I'm not anti-sleep. And for these reasons, I just don't want people thinking they're not going to make progress. But if we're trying to optimize things, and we're all different, so bear that in mind, where your number lies will be different to someone else's. I tell you what, it's a relationship thing, isn't it? Jeez, I find that a lot. What time do you go to bed? What time do you sleep? How long do you need to sleep? Like, you're going to bed 4 hours later than someone and waking up 15 minutes before them. It's annoying. Talking from personal experience. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah. So where sleep's important, it'll be different for everyone. And muscle loss and fat loss. Now, again, talking about shift workers, talking about, and I do want these difficult conversations that sometimes, okay, a breastfeeding mother, she's, feeling like her body's not her own. She's feeling like a bit down about how she looks, whether or not she should, she certainly shouldn't be judging herself, because of the thing it's gone through. But whether or not she should want to change that, people have different opinions, but really it's up to the individual and what they want to do. I certainly wouldn't want them to do it from a place of hating themselves. But it needs to come down to this honest conversation with yourself. Is this the right time? Breastfeeding, you can be in a calorie deficit. I've done that podcast. Idiots out there telling people that breastfeeding people can't be in a calorie deficit. Absolute morons. But whether on an individual basis, it's the right time to do that, just setting yourself up for failure. If you're someone whose sleep is absolutely mashed because of a crazy little new baby who sleeps 30 minutes and then wakes up again and then sleeps 30 minutes and wakes up again. That was one of my babies. I honestly thought her brain wasn't going to develop because she just did not sleep. And she's ended up like me. And I think in a way she sort of developed quicker because she was just awake more, looking around more. And that's why she started walking and talking so early. Just more time on the earth when you're that little. And so it's just that conversation of, if you are someone who needs that sleep, it is impacting you in that way, having the conversation with yourself. So, but also knowing these things, when we have studies that look at, and not even the 4 hours, it's like, it's more of this like 20 to 30% less sleep. We are seeing significant, during a fat loss period, reduced percentage of fat loss versus the group that's getting 8 hours, and also an increase in lean body mass loss. So it's something to consider. There's a really interesting mental masturbation thing that I don't know if I've ever used that term on the podcast yet. Mental masturbation. Essentially, it's just like thinking just for the sake of pleasure rather than anything really overly productive. Funny definition, really. Maybe it's a bit of an old school thing. In these days, it's like self-pleasure is a really important part of your self-care and mental well-being, blah, blah, blah. Everyone's just suddenly masturbation's gone from this thing that no one talks about, and it's just this really anti thing, and just women definitely shouldn't do and never do, and men do, but they're perverts because they do it, to this world where it's just I don't know, it's probably driven a lot by money. All these sex toy companies is you owe it to yourself, you be proud of it, do it on the bus. Your relationship will fail if you don't do it. Anyway, sorry, going off on one. Mental masturbation, discussion of and I want to do a podcast on this, actually. This has been something I have been mentally masturbating over, is sleep and dieting. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, but just something that happens. It's not the impact of your life impacting your sleep and what that has on your diet. It's the other way around. If we talk about reverse causation, dieting and the impact that then has on sleep, duration and quality. I didn't actually mention this, but I'm not just making this up about everyone's different, and it's just this really woo hippie thing. The studies have been done on twin studies, which are just some of my favorite studies. When you look at twins, you just get such an amazing insight into nature versus nurture. Is it my genes doing this, or is it just my environment, the way I've been, my life experience or whatever? And even two twins with very different lives, but these sort of shared genetics, sleep duration, and I believe it is sleep quality, have been measured, and they're 50-ish%, the heredited tendencies, sleep. Is it sleep latency? No, it's sleep length and sleep quality. Again, I'll link you the studies. It's not, sleep research is not one where I can just pluck authors and saying that. And also the authors, there's some good stuff coming out of Australia, a lot of Australian universities, but the surnames are just not just so hard to pronounce. And when you don't know the researcher personally, or you've not spoken to them, or you've not seen them speak in person, so you've heard them say their name, or if you've not heard them on a podcast saying their name, it just doesn't stay in your head, does it? I can picture them the V's and the T's and the W's and the sort of Croatian-esque surname. But then I'm it's just someone who's got that surname, who's living in Australia, publishing out of whatever university. Anyway, that's one of the curtailment studies. I even think it's a 2019 one. Anyway, I can't quote it. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, the twin studies. Was I? Yeah. Was I? Uh-oh. That's bad, isn't it? Anyway, I feel like this podcast is going on too long. So that's really where I wanted to wrap up in terms of the impact of lack of sleep on fat loss and body composition, those things. So yeah, and I was talking about the genetic tendencies and those kind of things. So summary wise, I hope what I've wanted you to get out of the podcast has happened. So, 1, I hope you smiled. 2, I hope it's been cathartic for those of you who like the AS. Someone said to me, I read it actually in the previous conversation I'd had with them when they replied to something recently. They're like, oh, when you take sips of drinks, it's very ASMR. And I was like, I don't think I drink all that much during podcasts, do I? But yes, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you're enjoying the podcast being back. I'm not trying to discourage people from sleep, categorically not. I think it's very useful for many different things. And that's what the research says. But it's bearing in mind that missing a few hours sleep, even if that's regular, the impact, the magnitude of that effect is actually very small. It's only when we have significant reductions in sleep. But the problem is, if you are someone who genetically needs 9 hours, so Sarah, who is kind of like my right-hand person, woman, man, second in command at M&U, she's like, I don't think she'll mind me saying this, I'm fairly sure, she always says, I need 9 hours sleep. Like, that's just her. She regularly functions on less, but she is best on 9 hours-ish, 8 to 9 hours. Now, if you're that person, and then we talk about only getting 6 hours, then we are getting into that realm of, well, that's that is a third, 3 hours loss, 33%. And it's getting into the realms of some of the research, and certainly less than 6 hours. So, and this is on, I know I've talked about performance, body composition, appetite, calorie consumption, but there's, sleep impacting on a wide array of other things that I haven't discussed here. But yes, I hope I've just balanced the argument a little bit, hopefully stopped anyone feeling, and also got some of you practitioners away from going, like just hammering on at a client too much on something that isn't a principle for fat loss. Yeah. Did I actually talk about the mental masturbation thing? Is that where I lost myself earlier? Sorry. So talking about lack of sleep. So it's like dieting, but like competition bodybuilders and muscle loss. That's where my mind went then. So anyway, that was just a thing. I'll maybe talk about that in the sleep, the reverse causation, sleep, the impact of dieting on sleep as opposed to sleep on dieting, and the muscle loss there. And in the bodybuilder sense, people get really lean. They just like, I feel amazing when I diet. And actually, I think when I've previously thought about it, it's probably in some of my rapid fat loss podcasts. When I do a rapid fat loss phase, I can literally almost never sleep. And I feel this amazing mental clarity all day long. I just feel great. Which is so weird, isn't it? Like eating 800 calories a day and like sleeping soundly, but very small, very few hours. But it is a common, that's not just me, a very common thing when people just do any sort of diet that they are enjoying and finding sustainable is, I just wake up feeling more mental clarity. Now, even in some of the intermittent fasting research maybe leads us this way, but potentially there are very obvious mechanisms and hormones and I guess evolutionary theory, basis within evolutionary theory of why that might happen with regards to cortisol and adrenaline and, availability of these energy substrates and what that might allow us to do, in terms of if we think of like hunter-gatherer type scenario and the impacts that cortisol or adrenaline would have on fuel to provide substrate for going to hunt or gather or whatever. Anyway, it's cool. It's interesting. I hope you've enjoyed that. I'll stop talking now. Anything else to tell you? I might have a tour day. I should have said this at the beginning. Oh, goodness. How can we do this? Maybe I'll get Lucy or Tia to edit this to the beginning. On the 3rd, is it the 3rd of June? I might be doing a last minute tour date in Dublin. I'm probably only going to do 1, maybe 2. I might speak in Austria, maybe. 3rd of June, Saturday, 3rd of June, yes. One of my tour dates. People have been asking me, it's like a bank holiday weekend there. So if you want to fly across from neighbouring countries, England, if you want to drive down from Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, anywhere else, like, I come from mainland Europe, would love it. 3rd of June, save the date, go on my Instagram profile and click. In fact, I'll put it in the show notes, a link, click, type your email address in, and I'll let you know some details, first release of some tickets for that. It was like a morphine gas and air thought that I just had that was like, I want to do a talk. I love public speaking. I love being in a room of people and making them laugh. Why am I not doing that this year? And the reason is because I'm so busy. I'm just like, let's just get it done. And it's also that perfectionist attitude of just like, if we did it right and get as many people there, because I feel sad. I literally put it on my Instagram. People are like, you should have let me know sooner. I've literally just booked a trip to, I can't remember where she said, Greece or something, or no, what was it? Was it Ibiza? Can't remember. So I feel bad for that, but it's just like, it's that whole thing. Do the training session at 1 a.m. or don't do it at all. If I don't do it at all, no one benefits. So, and it's that whole thing. I'm not there to make money. It's always unbelievable value for money. The amount people charge for terrible talks, and my talks are fantastic, but also it's just like the way we look after you, the refreshments, the expense of lunch. We always make sure everyone gets in refreshments, and a nice enjoyable day out, hang out with me and learn, laugh, and then we'll obviously have an after party, always a good bit if you want to join for that. But anyway, and for like pennies versus hundreds of pounds that people usually charge. So and get in on the first release, because it's always the one that we want to just like get, enough to cover at least costs pretty much. Cool. Until next time, much love. Hopefully that was everything I should have said. I think I had a post-it note. Look, there it is. What a gimp. Mention Dublin tour, 3rd of June. Lucy, that was, to be fair, Lucy, that should have been on my flipping podcast mic. Right, much love.